To it, our esteemed speaker opening this session today has a wealth of experience spanning 35 years, 22 of which has been here at ADB. Before joining the bank, he worked for the government of Japan for 12 years, focusing on policy development and program administration. Director General Hideaki Iwasaki, please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this session, the second half of the afternoon, and it's always challenging to attract people, but I really appreciate your interest in this session. The topic we are dealing with is accelerating energy transition in ASEAN. It's a very broad topic, but we have expert speakers who would be presenting their perspectives. Just a background, when there was an Memorandum of Cooperation signed between the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry of Japan, METI, Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia Area, and ADB under the Asia Zero Emissions Community, ASEC. It was last year that marked a pivotal step towards advancing practical and whole of economy energy transitions across Asia. The MOC emphasized our shared commitment in fostering inclusive and resilient growth in the region. Central to the ASEC working group's mission is to drive significant emission reductions and advance emerging technologies that tackle decarbonization challenges, particularly in high emit and hard to abate sectors. This is demonstrated by the working group's collaborative efforts to publish a report on transition finance with a prime focus in ASEAN. A key pillar of this cooperation is transition finance, a critical enabler that will accelerate key innovative energy solutions to support a just transition and long-term sustainability in the region. As I said, today's session gathers experts from government, academia, industry, and from ADB, who will be deliberating on transition finance for industry, regional connectivity, emissions abatement, and the role Japanese government can play. I should say Japan as a whole can play. This session, I hope, will equip us with expert perspectives on the region and deepen our mutual understanding of how ASEAN's energy landscape is quickly evolving and how our collective expertise can help shape and empower a sustainable future. With this background, I strongly encourage everyone to ask questions and engage in a meaningful dialogue during the panel discussion to further explore how we can scale up transition finance and leverage our knowledge and resources to drive advancements in clean energy technology as one region. Once again, thank you to our esteemed speakers, panelists, METI for co-organizing this session, and to everyone here who have joined this session for being part of important conversation, and I'm hoping for a productive session ahead. Thank you and good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emanuele Bianco. I work in the energy sector here in ADB, and I want to introduce today's topic by presenting you the early insights from the joint report that was mentioned before, and Transition Finance for ASEAN, Hard to Abate and High Emitting Sector. That is a joint report developed by ADB, METI, and AREA. Um, just to give you a background and understanding the size of the challenges ahead. So we know more or less the challenge ahead because the region is relying on fossil fuels for its power generation, particularly coal, that represent a sizable share exceeding 50% in many countries of the region. And the region has yet to fully harness all the technologies related to the energy transition, including renewable energy, energy efficiency, CCS, or clean green hydrogen. And there are several reasons for why the renewable energy has not picked up in the region yet. But in order to understand the size of the challenge, we also have to look at the economic factors. In a larger part of the world, in the advanced economies, the GDP growth and the CO2 emission have achieved a sort of decoupling. In some cases, even going with CO2 emission decreasing while GDP continues to increase. I don't know if you can see it, but on the slide, you can see Southeast Asia, where GDP and CO2 emission are keeping going at the same pace. And the region is indeed a region where GDP continued to increase with more than 45% in the past decade, but emissions are not being decoupled, actually following a one-to-one route. And the emissions, if we keep going in this direction, are projected to double from 2025. And interesting, 70% of this emission will be in industry and industry, power generation, and transport. So we have to tackle this, the region has to tackle these emissions, has to tackle this problem. And that's the reason why we decided to look into this and understand what can be done to avoid this dire scenario, which is indeed dire, because the region is, it will be affected by climate change more than other parts of the world. The Philippines, for example, is the second country in the world that will mostly be affected by climate change. And it's not only about increasing temperatures, because the impact of climate change in the region will bring a number of impacts, including water stress increase, less frequent but more intense typhoons, impact on the food production, impact on the mortality with heat-related mortality, but also water and vector-borne diseases, loss in productivity, and so on and so forth. And in order to measure it, we can try to understand it compared to the GDP. And 1 degree of global warming will decrease the GDP of the region by 1.7%, according to ADB estimates. But a higher warming, for example, 4.8, would impact the GDP quite notably, down to 12.5%. So we have to understand why the region is not developing renewable energy or energy transition-related technologies. And we know that there is not one single answer. It's the compound effect of various factors, various risks that, despite the presence of good renewable energy resources, lead to project failure or higher risk and unfavorable financial projection. What does that mean is that the impact of this risk is that we have higher operational cost, higher capex, higher cost of capital, and a higher LCOE, which is not a given. It's not something that must remain like this for the years to come. We are already witnessing a good example of a low LCOE on a cost of energy that is below the cost of new coal in countries like Cambodia and Vietnam when the right policies are present. We identified the numbers of challenges is enormous. We tried to identify that in a set of challenges that regroup all of them. So the fundamental challenge is the fact that the region is continuous economic growth, and indeed we must remain in this way, but we need basically to both decarbonize the current assets and procure renewable energy at the same time. This is not something that every part of the world has to address. Of course, there are a lot of new hard-to-abate or high-emitting assets. More about that later. And as I mentioned, unlimited attractive investment for new projects. There is also the fact that VA integration is somehow a challenge. The shares of variable renewable energy in the region is still low, so flexibility issues are not yet a problem. But as the shares may increase in the future, the power systems are not totally ready to host large shares of variable renewable energy. Also, we have in the region little experience with energy transition technologies like batteries or thermal storage. And at the same time, on the policy side, enabling policies are somehow lagging, and more about that later. And there is a limited cooperation and or interoperability within the region to facilitate the energy transition. So every market by itself. And in addition, as I mentioned, there is a need to, yes, have an economic growth, yes, have a decarbonization, but also have a just energy transition that is orderly and keep the people at the center of the discourse. So just to show some number, the region hosts some of the youngest coal assets in the world. The average age of coal generation is possibly in some countries the lowest that you can find, with specifically in Vietnam, with a current average age of 11 years. And if you look at with comparison with more advanced economies, this is really an exceptional feature of this region. And of course, these plants have not achieved neither their technological nor their economical lifetime. And dismissing them is going to be hard, also because most of these plants rely on not on a liberalized market for their cash flow, but on PPAs signed with the government that will make the phased out of these plants even just more difficult. So there is a substantial unrecovered locked-in capital. And the same goes also, sorry, I don't have a slide for this, but the same goes also for steel factories or chemical factories. They are all very young. So intervening in them or refurbishing them is not something that can happen without substantial cash influx or a substantial plan for overall decarbonization. Sorry. And just to mention, I already mentioned, but we still live in the energy trilemma. We need to achieve energy security, keeping an environmental stewardship and economic efficiency when talking about the energy sector. Renewable energy proved more and more time that they can provide these things, but we will need an approach to an holistic approach to ensure that all of these things happens at the same time. So on the report, we identified the 3 investment themes. One is, of course, scaling up renewables. We need more renewable energy, and we will need to invest in it, any kind of renewable energy, dispatchable and non-dispatchable. But it will not work without a good green infrastructure, pipelines, and for green fuels and transmission lines, and also investment to decarbonize the current high-emitting and hard-to-abate assets. We're going to need a full suite of policy. There will be not one policy that will fix this all. We're going to need policy at the macro level, strategies, long-term plans, just in transition, inclusion in laws, market level support with redesigning of market structure, carbon markets, standardization, program level policies, meaning those policies to kickstart the early investments like PPAs, feed-in types, and so on and so forth, but also in some cases, project level support for those assets that are important for the welfare of a nation, but needs to be decarbonized in any case. We identified the technologies with specific roadmaps that were developed by area, and we also discussed largely in the report about transition finance. The report focused on how to ensure that this kind of finance that is different from green finance, and for which we are going to hear a lot today, is adopted in the region, which still lack of unified definition and so on and so forth, and has a specific specific recommendations that are in the report. I want to focus also, because I see that my time is almost over, on the collaboration, because it's important that we recognize the need to focus, to have a collaborative framework somehow between the various stakeholders and between the asset owners, the policymakers, the governance body, the financial sector, to come up with solutions within nation and internationally, regionally, for to achieve the energy transition. We identify some potential areas of collaboration, including regional standards, green industrial parks, or industrial parks, decarbonized industrial parks, the ASEAN power grid, which already is an active project, and creating a regional financing facility to facilitate the energy transition and also for hard to abate and high emitting assets. So thank you for your attention, and I leave now to the next speaker. Thank you.
Hello, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and some of you are old friends. So nice to be here. It's a pleasure and honor. So I'm Yan Fei, for those who don't know me yet, from IRIA as a research fellow. I'm dedicated to power studies and also renewable energy study. Some coverage also extend to e-mobility. So today I will be focusing on ASEAN power grid topic, and also sharing some thinking about how Asia zero emission community can be fueling APG development. APG, as you know, is a physical interconnection between ASEAN member countries. It's basically grid-to-grid interconnectors that we're referring to. But based on that, some countries build this for the purpose of energy security as a kind of backup. But actually, these investments, this infrastructure can be monetized, right? So the initial form of doing that is actually bilateral trade of power. And if you want to see even more gains from these assets, we can move on to multilateral power trade. Actually, even more forms of markets, as you can see here, can be derived as we move on to more advanced level. We can have auxiliary service markets open. We will have a fully integrated regional power trade, similar to the European power market. Even more is that we can have some derived market based on APG and MPT, which is like a renewable energy certificate market, financial derivatives based on energy trading, or even like transmission right trading. And then carbon market. This can all be connected so that you can see that APG is really a strategic pillar to support not only like the growing demand of meeting the growing demand for electricity in the region, achieving higher level of renewable integration, but also like climate change, decarbonization goals. So it's a strategic pillar. And that is what we envision as the steps of APG evolvement eventually into an integrated regional market. But having said so, as you know, APG and MPT development currently face many challenges. The first layers of challenges, I think, are a hindrance for us to build up the basic markets like a bilateral or multilateral trade. So in this regard, we need to resolve the policy issues, political issues, market setup issues, and resolving also some basic technical and economic barriers, such as the financing of APG, right? So once these basic challenges are sorted out, we can already enable bilateral and multilateral trade of electricity. Now, when you want to move to more advanced markets, like what we call short-term energy markets, and also auxiliary market and derived financial instrument markets, you need to go further to solve these issues as like harmonization needs, and resolve the transmission capacity mechanism, and also wheeling charge, so as to support sustainable evolution of APG, because APG in these grid-to-grid interconnectors will need financing, right? And the financing is built on, I think the bank experts know well that it needs to be built on stable expected stream of income. So these advanced forms of market development will support that, but we need to sort out the pricing mechanism. So these are more advanced issues that ASEAN really need to work out. So we have different layers of challenges here. Having said so, as you can see, ASEAN region is making progress. This is based on the understood benefits of APG and its multilateral power trade. So that you're seeing that these strategic projects are ongoing, like West Kalimantan to Sarawak interconnection. Laos to Thailand already built many interconnections, and also LTMS, the so-called Pathfinder project. So the region is making solid progress towards the development of MPT. However, from area perspective, for years we have been working with ASEAN organizations like ACE and also HAPWA to seek for a integrated solution for building up the ASEAN power grid and eventually the integrated market in the region. So we, 2 years ago, we did this study to lay out the roadmap for ASEAN as a top-down approach, okay, to give the integrated overall design for ASEAN electricity market. Sorry, I think there's some technical glitches happen. So this is supposed to be a presentation of the institution that we propose for ASEAN countries to establish in order to support the various function of an integrated grid and the market. We have the planning function at ASEAN level. We have the coordination of a TSO function at ASEAN level, and then we have the so-called ASEAN Market Operator Unit, AMO unit design. So in total, besides the assistive functions, there are 3 major blocks of functions designed for this ASEAN institution. You can call it ASEAN Power Pool or some other names. Anyway, this is what we have envisioned, that if we want to eventually move on to advanced level of market integration, we will need to develop gradually these institutions. And these are some specific functions that they can carry out under each of these function blocks. As you can see, these are all essential for maintaining the operation on daily basis, and also ensuring that the whole system is designed and developed in a sustainable way under coordinated planning among the countries. So having had all these big visions about where ASEAN power grid and also its integrated market is going, we also understand well that in reality, we are actually having many subtle barriers that are hindering for us to move into this integrated solution. And therefore, we also believe that there are these bottom-up momentums developing in ASEAN. Some from like these LTMS projects, from policymakers, from utilities, they are looking for solutions. We also believe that the dynamics in the development of technologies can also contribute to this bottom-up pathfinding process. So that this is our recent project with ACE, and it's also a research topic defined under APIC, that we are looking for solutions from the technology side, because ASEAN countries, some of them have expressed this strongly, that they want decentralized solutions. And some of these technologies, like supply side technology, AI, smart trading with blockchain and energy storage, would actually go into the same direction as supporting a more decentralized while smarter energy system in the region, so that it is totally possible. These technologies will provide us some innovative new solutions, supporting a very different architecture in ASEAN to develop this regional market. We have also recently, therefore, initiated a new project called the ASEAN Layer Market Development Study. This is in line with the roadmap that has last year been published by ACE to guide the formation of multilateral power trade in ASEAN in a step-by-step way and also in a decentralized way. So that area is continuously supporting APG development from both top-down approach and bottom-up approach. From bottom-up side, we're complementary. We're doing complementary studies or efforts to policymakers, LTMS initiative. We're looking into the technological solutions. We also have studies covering the financing of APG. To very quickly summarize my quick thoughts on how AZEC can contribute to APG. Firstly, there are synergies that AZEC, firstly, will, from many perspectives, boost the development of APG. For example, enabling the faster development of renewables so that there is greater demand for APG, right? And then also this sustainable fuel market development, that the complementary development or the coupling of power grid and hydrogen development may also help to accelerate the development of power market in the region. And next generation industry initiative will enable higher level of electrification that also contributes to the demand for APG, right? And in return, reciprocally, APG contributes to the energy security goal and economic growth goal set by AZEC. Having said so, something more specific about how AZEC can help APG development is a financing story. I summarized this as the specialized support from AZEC and also the holistic support from AZEC. For example, new financial mechanisms, for example, under the transition finance idea, can be adding to the sources and ways of financing APG projects. And also, it will promote the policy formation, needless to mention. And eventually, we see that more advanced regional market will also, promoted by AZEC, right, will increase or enhance the commercial value of APG project and therefore contribute to the stability of the expected revenue streams from these APG assets. So from these perspectives, specialized and holistic view, I think there is sufficient reason to believe that AZEC will boost the financing of APG. So these are just my initial thoughts about this. I'm very happy to be here to exchange these views with many specialists from especially banking. So hope to learn more from you in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, hello everyone. This is Hyuta Endo, Assistant Director of Ministry of Industry, Trade and Economy, METI, Japan. Taking this opportunity, I will briefly walk you through Japanese government's decarbonization policy package, which is called Green Transformation, or GX, and also the role of transition finance. Since we are a government office in charge of economy and industry, I'd like to talk about carbon neutrality and how we see it from the viewpoint of corporations, especially from high-emitting sectors' viewpoint. Okay. So, yes, first thing we want to highlight from our viewpoint is that there are more and more pressures surrounding corporations. On this slide, we showcase three dimensions. First one comes from nation level. Most countries have now set the target year for carbon neutrality and are now in the planning stage of achieving it. This hasn't changed even after Trump administration started. Corporations operating in a region shall follow the region's directions. For the second dimension, actually, I think this is the biggest one, but this comes from the financial sector. As more and more financial institutions too face carbon neutral pressures, mainly from investors, their policy has to be aligned with those pressures more or less. So a company may no longer be able to raise funds from the financial sector if they don't have any decarbonization strategy. This kind of world is becoming a reality these days. Moving on to the last dimension, I want to touch upon the business sector. These days, more and more global companies plan to achieve decarbonization on a whole supply chain basis. So there is a possibility that a company in a global supply chain may no longer be able to sell products if they don't have any decarbonization plan. From corporations' viewpoint, we can say there are carbon neutral pressures for high-emitting sectors companies from every aspect of their business activities. Furthermore, nowadays, we might be able to say movement towards carbon neutrality has an implication on trade policy. Let me take the CBAM as an example. CBAM is short for Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which aims to charge on embedded CO2 emissions of each imported product to avoid carbon leakage and bring equality to the EU green market. With this CN policy being implemented, exporters to EU market have to think about decarbonization. Otherwise, they will lose their competitiveness, which can be one of the biggest pressures for companies. From my understanding, the detail on CBAM are still discussed, but implication here is that efforts towards decarbonization can be a decisive factor for companies' competitiveness, and CN policy means more than what it simply means. On the next slide, as you can see, some governments are implementing large-scale measures to promote investment in order to better cope with this game change. Promoting GX investment is now a decisive factor of national and business competitiveness. This is the world where corporations are facing, and this is why we have put so much effort on paving the way for corporations operating in Japan to transform their business model. Then let's move on to the next section. I will be explaining our policy more in detail. In short, green transformation, or GX, aims to simultaneously achieve three goals: economic growth, stable energy supply, and emission reductions. The key point here is that GX is not only for emission reduction, but also for economic growth and energy security. I said just earlier that corporations are facing with carbon neutral pressures, but at the same time, since Japanese companies have many strengths in decarbonization technologies, transition toward net zero can be another source of economic growth if we can properly promote decarbonization investment. And it will help Japan less rely on fossil fuels and contribute to stable energy supply. This is the basic idea of promoting GX. Let me explain how we promote GX on the next slide. So, pro-growth carbon pricing concept. This is the core of Japan's GX policy. And this is the, I think, the concept of is the large scale upfront investment support followed by gradual carbon pricing. At the first step, the government will invest 20 trillion yen in GX industries in the coming 10 years. Those government investment will be used for R&D of decarbonization technologies and also for capital investment support for deployment of these technologies. We expect this kind of government spending to be a stimulus for private sector investment. As we estimate 150 trillion yen public-private investment in the coming 10 years is needed to achieve carbon neutral target in Japan. The second step is the introduction of carbon pricing. This is the measure to retrieve 20 trillion yen government spending earlier. To fill the time gap, the government issues climate transition bond, which is the first sovereign transition level bond. With this scheme, the government can gradually introduce carbon pricing without cutting companies' current investment budget for GX. The key is the time gap. If we do the investment support and the regulation at the same time, companies will not afford to carry out GX investment at a large scale. On the slide 9 and 10, these are just a reference on how we want to allocate the 20 trillion yen investment support and how we see the 150 trillion yen public-private investment needs to be allocated. So let's move on to the next section, which is transition finance. As explained, high-emitting sectors facing with carbon neutral pressures, maintaining good finance market for high-emitting sector is another key for realizing the 150 trillion yen public-private investment, as that's the area where GX investment is really needed. And we think transition finance plays a crucial role on this end. As you all know, to realize power of economy decarbonization, all the industries need to transform, but some industries such as electricity steel making are so fundamental and cannot jump in the leap to decarbonize society. We have supported these kind of hard to avail industries' financial environment using the concept of transition finance. Because we see green finance is difficult to address those kind of high emitting sectors' funding needs, as it is used more for developed technologies like solar PV, electric vehicles, or else. So with this in mind, let me showcase what we have been doing to promote transition finance and to stimulate the domestic market, finance market. First, as shown in number 1 and number 2, on this slide, we published basic guidance on transition finance and sector-specific roadmaps, mainly for domestic high-emitting sector companies, trying their best to decarbonize their business. But the point is, companies have to have credible transition strategy and have to position their transition activities under the strategy. And when it comes to credibility, government-made sector-specific roadmaps are the key tool, as companies can show the credibility by just claiming the alignment with the roadmap. And not only issuers and borrowers, we encourage financiers as well. We published some paper for financial institutions. The key message for financial institutions is you don't have to hesitate in financing in high-emitting sectors in case they have a credible transition strategy towards net zero, and also in case the use of proceeds is something essential to carry out the strategy. We aim to pave the way for transition investment to be financed by financial institutions without any concerns. On slide 14 and 15, these are the, for your reference on the sector-specific roadmaps that the government published. First one is about iron and steel sector, and the other one is about power sector. And on the next slide, yes, this showcases use case of JERA, a power generation giant. Almost all companies refer the government roadmap when they publish transition strategy and raise fund as transition label. As a result of these activities, yes, the cumulative amount of transition level finance in Japan has recorded around 2.4 trillion yen, or over 15 billion US dollar. We hope more and more funds to flow where emissions are, and technologies to be developed and to be commercialized as soon as possible. To sum up, realizing forward economy net zero is not achievable overnight. Thus, our strategy is to develop technologies with 20 trillion yen investment support, and by maintaining transition finance market for 150 trillion yen public-private investment. This will contribute not only to decarbonization, but also contribute to keeping up Japan's industry competitiveness. Then the last part, I will explain Japan's contribution to ASEAN countries' decarbonization. As mentioned, for the purpose of transition to the forward economy decarbonization, Japan has promoted GX investment both from private and public sectors. So we want to put our focus on technology development so we can deploy them as soon as possible and then expand them into ASEAN market. Of course, we understand the circumstances vary from country to country, but generally speaking, we see many in common between Japan and ASEAN countries. If you on this slide, you can easily see many countries in the region are still dependent on fossil fuels in terms of energy, just like Japan. Also, if you take a look at the slide, you will see the availability of renewable energy sources limited for many areas, which is also the same problem that Japan is facing. We, as the government of Japan, hope more and more technologies being developed and will be commercialized as soon as possible, and hope we can contribute to the ASEAN region's decarbonization. We also think transition finance can play a role in Asia, mainly to contribute to growing energy demand in the region, as Emmanuel mentioned. From my understanding, to cope with energy demand growth, Asia needs to introduce current low-emission technologies together with zero-emission technologies. We will be contributing with Japanese companies' strengths, such as energy utilization and power grid, and so on. But as I said, carbon neutral pressures are here as well. So Japanese companies and banks are responsible to explain stockholders, especially those who are keen on carbon locking. That is why we need more information on transition strategy from ASEAN countries' side. As you can see, loan dominates against bonds in the region. So while we have promoted transition level finance in Japan, and level finance is very important in this region too, but from the standpoint of Japanese corporations and banks who are willing to contribute to the region, there should be another way that transition finance is expected to be used to fit the current situation in the region. When it comes to leveraged finance, International Capital Market Association, ICMA, has provided global standards like Green Bond Principle and Transition Finance Handbook, but they are mainly expected to be referenced by companies large enough to issue bonds. Considering bond market is mainly used on advanced economies, we might be able to broaden the scope of transition finance to include EMDEs, loans, non-leveraged finances. So this is a little bit what is right, but let me conclude my presentation. For GX technologies, the key terms are 20 trillion yen government investment support and 150 trillion yen public and private investment, and transition finance market for high-emitting sectors. And for transition finance market, the key is government-made sector roadmaps. This will serve as a guide for companies' credible transition strategy. Many Japanese companies will contribute to ASEAN countries as soon as we develop technologies. And for the time being, we will contribute to current low-emission technologies as well to better cope with stakeholders who are keen on carbon locking. Keys are for Asia to make clear long-term transition strategy, such as sector-specific roadmaps, and announce how specific deals contribute to the strategy, as many Japanese corporations have some commitment related to carbon neutral. This summer, our public and private working group will publish a report on this matter. So I appreciate it if the report could be shared in ASEP next year. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Simon Roland. I'm the program manager for Southeast Asia at the International Energy Agency. I'm really humbled and happy to participate in this session along with our partners from METI and from AREA. And I would like to thank them for their thought on the different topic. So I'm here to share some of the insights of the IEA when it comes to the LNG market, as well as opportunities to reduce emission from the supply chain, some of which is actually coming from a report which is not even published yet. So you'll be among the first one worldwide to have access to some of this data. So let's start with how does the LNG market looks like. The first thing is, and it's not a surprise, LNG, natural gas, is set to remain a crucial part of the global energy system for years to come. Its share of the energy mix of individual countries varies widely, depending on the region, the countries, and of course the distribution of natural gas resources is completely uneven. I think you can also see there was a major change around 21, 22, obviously due to the interruption of Russian pipelines export to Europe. And as a result, around 550 BCM of natural gas was transported as LNG in 2024, just under 15% of global natural gas consumption, and 500 BCM was transported by long-distance pipeline. A large new wave, also a consequence of the geopolitical situation, a large new wave of LNG export capacity is also set to come online. If all projects that are currently under construction are completed in time, available liquefaction capacity is expected to rise by 270 BCM globally, from 580 BCM per year today to 850 BCM per year in 2030. So this is for the picture of the LNG market. Now let's have a look at the supply chain and where emissions are coming from. First of all, let me start by saying that there is a wide range of reported LNG emission. The literatures we have do not always agree, and this is largely driven by different process assumption, system boundaries, and allocation method. But the IEA upcoming report, emission from LNG supply and abatement opportunities, will provide a comprehensive assessment of GHG across the LNG value chain and evaluate the technical and economic potential of emission reduction pathway. For this report, the IEA has analyzed over 5,000 upstream production sites, 140 liquefaction terminals, 220 regasification terminals, and tracked the voyage of over 750 LNG carrying ships, making around 6,500 round-trip journeys per year. So quite a significant amount of data. We connected all of this assets to form a thorough life cycle assessment that tracks each gas molecule journey from the wellhead through to regasification. We then examine the reduction option and associated costs to reduce this emission. First important lesson learned, most of the emission arise in the upstream, in particular because of the methane leaks during natural gas extraction and processing, along with the energy required to power upstream operation. Together, these emissions make up nearly half of LNG supply chain emission. Liquefaction is the most energy-intensive step in the LNG supply chain, with emission driven by the energy required for gas cooling and for compression. This makes up around 34% of the emission. The rest is associated with emission from transporting the gas, from shipping it, and for regasification. Global average emission intensity figures mask a very wide range of situations between countries. There is very high emitting situation and lowest intensity supply. This variation is explained primarily by the amount of methane leaks associated with producing the gas that goes into the LNG terminals. Some LNG supply routes are also longer and requires more energy. Let's look at abatement. The technologies and measures to prevent emissions are all well known and have already been deployed successfully around the world. Many of those reductions are, in fact, very cost effective. I think this fact is more and more known around the energy community. The additional methane captured can often be sold or used, generating revenues that cover the upfront expenditures in abatement technologies. In 2024, we estimate that around 40% of the 35 million megaton of methane emission from natural gas could be avoided at no net cost. This represents a massive missed opportunity. Some of the best options, as I said, are well known: leak detection and repair measure, and use of vapor recovery unit to recover low pressure gas flows that would otherwise be vented. Since these emissions are occurring along the natural gas value chain, they usually don't need additional infrastructure to bring captured gas to market, and so are some of the cheapest methane abatement options available today. So often, when we show this information, people ask us, well, if it's so cheap and if there's no cost, why aren't companies doing it? And our analysis of this is there is not one single reason, but a number of possible explanations. First of all, the return on investment from methane abatement project may be longer than other investment opportunities. Capital requirements are maybe too small to grab the attention of the boards of the various companies when making investment decisions. There is still, in spite of many organizations, including the IEA, pushing that message through, a lack of awareness regarding the scale of the issue, in particular when it comes to methane, and the importance of cost abatement, cost effectiveness of abatement. And finally, we estimate that infrastructure or institutional arrangement are still not fully adequate, making it difficult for companies to receive the income from avoided emission. For example, there is a risk of split incentive whereby the owner of the equipment does not directly benefit from the reducing leaks, or contractual terms do not allow methane saving to impact revenues. Regardless of the value of captured gas, we estimate that it will be cost effective to deploy nearly all methane abatement measures if emissions were priced at 20 USD per ton of CO2 equivalent, which is obviously a huge reduction in emission at a very low price. So I just wanted to finish my presentation by sharing a few examples of initiative of international cooperation, which we are all aware of the importance of this work, and really acknowledge the work they are doing to try to improve that situation. And of course, some are receiving contribution and support from the IEA. There are many different initiatives that have been launched to assess emission from LNG. Some look primarily at methane, others at specific part of the supply chain. There are many standards, guidelines that have been built over the year. One of the key initiatives is OGMP 2.0, which is led by UNEP in cooperation with 100 companies from around the world, plus the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, the European Commission, and the Environmental Defense Fund. The aim is to develop a transparent, comprehensive reporting framework for methane emissions for the oil and the gas sector. It's a voluntary initiative, and really it aims to reconcile top-down and bottom-up approaches, but it really focuses only on methane and doesn't take into account CO2. The US Department of Energy is leading an international working group to advance a framework for the measurement, monitoring, reporting, and verification of greenhouse gas from the natural gas supply chain. This MMRV framework focuses on establishing minimum criteria, independent verification, and transparency to the multitude of voluntary industry, NGOs, and international government initiatives directed at quantifying emissions throughout the supply chain, and the AEA is participating as a stakeholder representative group. Finally, I wanted to mention the work initiated in 2023 by the US, Korea, Australia, the European Commission, and Japan, which signed a joint statement for supporting methane abatement activity and GHG reduction throughout the LNG value chain at the METI LNG Producer Consumer Conference, which was co-hosted by the IEA and by METI. And I think as part of this initiative, METI and JOCMEG are working together to collect information on the status of methane emission management and emission reduction effort for each LNG project, and publish this information together with best practices under the Coalition for LNG Emission Abatement Toward Net Zero, the CLEAN project. And through this program, METI and the IEA are really pursuing cleaner LNG supply chain by enhancing the visibility of methane and CO2 emission. All of these initiatives are contributing to make the system more transparent and offering more visibility to abate emission from the sector. Thank you so much.
You're on the panel already, so we'll save some energy by not having you go back and then come back. Good afternoon to all of you. My name is Pradeep Tarakan. I'm Director of Energy Transition at ADB, and I have the pleasure of moderating the panel that's going to start in a few minutes. I'd like to invite the panelists up on stage. From the ADB, we've got Catherine Gee, Senior Infrastructure Finance Specialist, Financial Structuring from our Southeast Asia Regional Department. From AREA, you've heard from him before, Dr. Lee Anfai, Senior Research Fellow on Energy. Please take your seat. From METI, Mr. Yuta Endo, Assistant Director. Please come on stage, sir. And we've got Simon from the IEA here already. And I'd also like to invite our precious private sector participant from Steel Asia Manufacturing Corporation, Mr. Pek Hung Chong, Chief Technology Officer. So, you know, it is day 4 of ASIF, and you've probably been to a lot of panels. There's probably a little bit of fatigue around the room. But I can tell you this is actually a very special panel, because this is really only one of 2 panels over this week that's focusing on what we call transition finance, or really focusing on the hard-to-abate sectors. You heard that term earlier today. Hard-to-abate sector refers to chemicals, oil and gas, steel, cement, and also green ports, shipping, long-distance aviation. We didn't talk much about that today, but we won't, but we'll be focusing more on the large industrial facilities. The second sector is a high-emission sector. This refers to really fossil-based power generation. You saw some of the numbers that my colleague put up earlier. Most of the facilities, especially in the ASEAN, are very young, coal-fired power plants, gas-fired power plants. So that's really what the focus of this panel is, and to see how we might begin to look at supporting deep decarbonization in these sectors, and what are the technology options that apply, what kinds of programs make sense, and then also in terms of financing this transition. Unfortunately, what's happening now over the last decade is that everybody just wants to do green. It's easy to finance solar parks, it's easy to finance onshore wind projects, it's easy to finance floating solar projects, but increasingly people are wary of supporting what we call brown to green. But the reality is that these assets don't just go away. And what we are seeing is, I think as my colleague Emmanuel presented, the green we still need to do a lot of, okay? But we're doing pretty well on that. We just need to ramp that up. The second is decarbonizing the hard-to-abate sector. We've got a lot of technology challenges. And as the region becomes more affluent, people are going to demand more steel. They're going to demand more cement. They're going to demand more petrochemicals, plastics, polymers, all the things that comes with it. So you need to build more of these facilities, but have to make them green, while you also decarbonize your existing infrastructure of power plants and industrial facilities. It's more like, building a plane while you're flying it, sort of thing. So really not an easy thing to do. So let me turn to the first question to the IEA. We're always grateful for their wonderful analysis and slick graphs that we all use. I think the methane emissions, methane abatement emissions challenge, I think really defines why we call it hard to abate. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves, right? You said the technologies exist, people know what to do. Increasingly, we know where the emissions are coming from. I mean, you can go online and look up to see which are the facilities that are actually emitting the most. But companies still don't do it, right? So that really, I think, epitomizes the challenge of hard to abate. It is hard. But maybe I can just ask you a broader question, Simon. Based on sort of you seeing, the transition finance projects and programs worldwide, what are sort of the broad implications in terms of what might be sort of the precursors that makes the needle move, and what implications might that have for the ASEAN?
Thank you. Thank you, Pradeep. I mean, when it comes to ASEAN, first of all, I think it's good to acknowledge that there has been a lot of work already done, that we're not starting from scratch, we're not reinventing the wheel. The ASEAN taxonomy, I forgot the term, the handbook on transition finance. Yeah. I mean, all this is starting to really provide guidance for all stakeholders, for investors. I think there is an increasing amount of work, especially supported by our Japanese colleague, on establishing standard. Although I think it's also important to really keep in mind the specific nature of each economy, of each country, of each situation. And of course, balance a transition objective, which of course that's something very important to our ASEAN partners, and to maintain that industrial competitiveness, meaning we need to decarbonize and grow. And I mean, the example, when I asked my colleague to share what would be the flagship example, is actually something that Endo-san mentioned earlier, is the roadmap that METI has established. It's a bit of one of the flagship key projects on how to actually support hard-to-abate sector to decarbonize. In particular, when we look at the steel industry, this has been heavily guided by METI. It's really based on a strong cooperation, strong engagement across stakeholders, and acknowledging that we both have new technology which are not competitive and which deserve to be supported through transition finance, through R&D and so on, and also that some source of energy, in particular LNG, will remain critical for the day to come. So I think based on that, there is this idea to really focus on what is actionable and how can we both focus on the process, while keeping, of course, the long-term goals, and to have targets which then have to be followed and implemented by the stakeholders. And I think that cooperative effort, supported by the public and really driven by the private, is really something which has been instrumental for, in particular, the steel, but also the power sector in Japan.
Thank you, Simon. I think you mentioned the role of sort of broad plans, and then you talked about sector maps, and then you talked about the ability to raise finance against those frameworks and plans, and then put it to work in projects. And as you all heard about Japan's ongoing work in this area, it's really developing into a case study on how a large industrial economy is preparing for decarbonizing its own sectors and its economy, while also preparing to help other countries. So I think those of you who were here at the opening plenary heard from the DG of METI that Japan accounts for about 3% of global GHG emissions. So they are obviously focused on reducing that and bringing it to net zero, but they're also keen to make a contribution to supporting the world to reducing a part of the 97% of what the world is accounted for. So I think if I could turn to Mr. Yuta Endo, We saw, I mean, I think that the climate transition finance, the bond issuance, the sector roadmaps, I mean, these are all sort of almost textbook, examples of how you go about helping, at the economy level, whole of economy level, subsector levels, and then that provides the basis for private sector to align with those approaches, because then the market is able to then actually evaluate what is not greenwashing and what is greenwashing, what is credible and what's not credible, and that creates the right sort of market incentives and financial incentives. But I think what's also important, especially for this audience, is your work in the ASEAN. I mean, Japan is a major trading partner of the ASEAN. You have large manufacturing facilities, and all of that is expected to grow. So perhaps if you could speak to, say, over the next 5 years, what is under the ASEC partnership, what are sort of the main activities you're hoping to carry out, and what might success look like?
Okay, thanks, Pradeep. Actually, under ASEC initiatives, in the first step, probably to better cope with the growth of demand of energy, we have to say that energy or gas has to be used in some ways. But because the Japanese companies have strengths in that kind of deployment of energy or gas, and that's the strong area for the Japanese companies. But we have to explain why Japanese companies contribute to that kind of area. There are some stakeholders that so much keen on the carbon locking, and some stakeholders that do not want Japanese companies or Japanese banks to invest in that kind of projects. But to better cope with that kind of stakeholders from Japanese companies, we have to have a narrative or a strategy or long-term strategy. That's the first thing we want all Asian companies to have. And if there is some kind of a strategy or plans that we can understand, then we can probably cope with the demands, growing demands of energy. So that's the first one. We can contribute to the ASEAN region's growing demand of energy. And also, as I mentioned, 20 trillion yen investment support is already started. So we can probably, in the long run, we can probably, develop some technologies like ammonia, hydrogen generation in the way that it makes economically efficient, economically makes sense. So probably in the next 10 years or 15 years, we can have developed that kind of technologies and then deploy that kind of technologies to the ASEAN market as well. It really support not only about the Japan's GHG emission, but also the ASEAN countries' contribution. And this is kind of not only from our end, it is also the source of growth of economy. Since Japan is now the population is now decreasing, and we have to maintain the strong economy, but we don't have any good source right now. So we have to have investment for the GX industries. Then we make the development in the technologies, and then we'll contribute to ASEAN countries. Then that's our game plan to contribute ASEAN countries GHG emission reduction and our growth at the same time. That's our game plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think clearly you're not ready to tell me what does success look like in 5 years, because you're already saying it's going to take 5 to, decadal or interdecadal program. But yes, definitely we hear you. I think again, as what DG Kihara-san said at the opening, is that what Japan is bringing to this is really financing, of course, technology, and then human resources. I mean, and the ability to work in partnerships for joint decarbonization, if you will. So we've talked about what's sort of the challenges in the global sector, side. We've talked about a large industrial economy and how they're working with developing Southeast Asia. let's now look at a single corporation, right? Or a single project developer. So Steel Asia. Pek-Chung, if I can ask you to maybe just tell us about who are you, the company, what is your mandate, what is your ambition, and how far along are you, and what's motivating all of this?
Thanks, Pradeep, and thanks to ADB for the privilege to share our story. I'm from Steel Asia, the Chief Technology Officer, and Steel Asia is currently the largest steel company in the Philippines, and we've been manufacturing steel rebars for almost 60 years. In fact, at the end of this year, we'll be celebrating our 60th anniversary. So Steel Asia today has 4 operating plants across the country, and they have been modernized over the years, with our total steel production capacity of 2.5 million tons a year. Philippines is actually not a very big steel market and definitely doesn't have a big steel industry. In fact, our chairman always say, the Philippines does not have a steel industry. It only has a rebar industry. So typically, yeah, in most countries, steel is being used to also stimulate industrialization and infrastructure development. Yeah, but unfortunately, we do not have a very big steel sector since the demise of National Steel Corporation of Iligan, Philippines. So a little bit about our Steel Asia story. We didn't really set out to decarbonize in the way that the global steel industry has announced. Steel Asia sees the Philippines' long-term GDP growth potential. And then we want to take this opportunity to grow together with the country because we see that the country cannot sustainably continue to import steel as it develops its infrastructure. Yeah, it is so unfortunate that Philippines actually have been exporting steel scrap, which is the key ingredient for recycling, and then importing finished steel, to fuel its industrial needs, to fuel its construction needs. So in our mind, we would like to expand to feed the needs of the country in its infrastructure development. And then how do we then do it? Which technology do we choose? Philippines is not blessed with high quality iron ore, one of the key ingredients to make steel. And neither does it also have much coal, which is another, what is called coking coal, a grade of coal that's used to blend with iron ore to make steel. Yeah, but what Philippines actually has is a fair amount of scrap, and it is still a scrap exporter in the region. And Philippines also has a large pipeline of renewable energy. So with Steel Asia's vision to develop the Philippine steel industry and lead its development, we see that it is most meaningful and it is most natural to go for what the Philippines has, which are scrap and renewable energy. And then we went on then to choose this technology because this technology, the scrap electric arc furnace technology, also happens to be the greenest technology for steelmaking today. In fact, we are planning to grow our steel making. We actually call it green steel already today. We have one plant making green steel in the Philippines today. We actually have it verified in terms of carbon footprint. And our carbon footprint in the Steel Asia Kalaka works is 0.28 ton of CO2 per ton of steel. This is nearly 90% lower than the traditional steelmaking of iron ore and coal, which generates 2.3 tons of CO2 per ton of steel. So in having the opportunity to convert Philippine scrap and renewable energy into green steel, we are having a large expansion plan now. We are going to grow 7 times green steel from 500,000 tons a year today to 3.5 million tons of green steel in the next 3 years. So this is the ambitious plan we have. We set out not to decarbonize, but to grow the industry so that it can serve the country's needs for infrastructure development. we also took the opportunity to use what the country has instead of relying on too much imports. And we have a green steel story as a result of that.
Thank you very much. If I could just follow on that, let's talk about the economics of the process, right? I mean, you often hear, hard to abate is also hard to sort of justify from a financial standpoint. So what are you able to share in terms of how do you make the numbers work on scrap to electric arc furnace relative to other traditional approaches?
Yes, I think in today's market, making steel from scrap isn't naturally the most cost effective. The world's largest steel producer is China, and majority is using the blast furnace route, iron ore and coking coal, generating quite a lot of CO2, and they have the same problems as the power plants today. Many of the blast furnaces are relatively young, and it will take a very special set of conditions to actually decarbonize. But for our case, it's different. Philippines also, Australasia benefits from being a latecomer in a way. We don't have legacy old steel plants to decarbonize. We have an opportunity to expand. And when we look at the long-term sustainability, beyond 2030, with all the regulations on carbon coming in, we actually think the writing is on the wall for the old technology of making steel using iron ore. Carbon taxes are coming up in so many countries, yes. Emissions trading systems, carbon borders are coming up first in Europe, but it's being studied by so many countries that even our fellow ASEAN neighbors are in the process of adopting it after European Union gets it running. So we see that for long-term sustainability and our expansion, we want them to last not for 5 years. We want them to last 40 years, 50 years. So with this sort of situations, we see the scrap EAF technology as a long-term. And one day, when there is not enough scrap, the electric arc furnace actually can be fed with another type of iron called DRI, or direct reduced iron, which is an alternative technology using either gas, can be natural gas, can be hydrogen, to convert iron ore into iron and then into steel after that. So we see this as a long-term sustainable strategy. In terms of cost, how do we manage? We are not trying to beat China in their own game of having the lowest cost steel. I think no country in the world really can beat the Chinese in terms of producing low-cost steel. So what we can, as with any businesses, we have to use our strengths. Steel Asia actually focuses on the domestic Philippines market. So we don't plan to export and compete in the export market with the Chinese. So with the Philippines domestic market, the ability then for us to serve our customers, providing them with the best service, lead times, supply chain management, quality after sales. I think all this enable us to differentiate ourselves from just being the lowest cost steel imported out there. So with this sort of situation, we think our projects are bankable, but of course, we are still in the process of getting new investors. We are also in the process of funding our projects with banks, commercial banks, and hopefully development banks as well. And yes, I think we are quite confident to execute these projects and build a Philippine steel industry, but a green one.
Thank you very much. Well, you mentioned a nice segue to development banks. So let me turn to my own colleague, Catherine. Thanks for joining us, Catherine. So ADB has been experimenting with different ways to finance projects that are sort of at the cusp of, sort of projects that have minor viability issues, access to financing issues. So we've set up blended finance facilities at different levels, at the national level, at the regional level, at the provincial level. And these have been traditionally focused on sort of the areas that we talked about, like large-scale renewables and so on. So maybe what we would like is to have maybe Catherine tell us about the ASEAN Green Finance Facility, or ACGF as we call it, a really special instrument that we've developed and we manage. So Catherine, tell us what is ACGF and what is its mandate? And perhaps, we often talk about models and approaches, but this is an example, a solution that's been in the works for a few years and has operational data in terms of performance. So if you could shine a light on that as well.
Sure, thank you. So yeah, I'm working in the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility. It's a mouthful, so yes, we have an acronym, ACGF. It is a regional initiative that was established with the ASEAN Infrastructure Fund and ADB. It started in a pilot phase in 2019, and it was really trying to tackle kind of the two main problems that we were seeing with the green transition in Southeast Asia, and that's actionability and bankability. So I think those are some of the key terms that we've heard throughout the discussion today is there might be solutions, but are they bankable solutions? So the approach that was taken was through fundraising with some of our key partners. So we have trust funds from the EU, UK, and Green Climate Fund that are highly concessional. So we're looking at 0 to 0.5% financing. And with that, we blend down the cost of finance for green projects. And we're specifically targeting projects that have 60% climate financing. That can be mitigation and or adaptation financing. There's a requirement for at least 30% of ADB financing. And then most importantly, we're looking to catalyze private sector. So this is one of the kind of, it's a bullet point that's added on to our eligibility criteria, but it's actually one of the most important factors that our partners are looking for when we bring projects to them is, they're willing to invest in this, and we are a sovereign facility, so we do work primarily just with governments and or state-owned enterprises. But what our partners want to see is what are we doing to support our governments to catalyze that private sector investment. And so that's really one of the key components that we look for with our projects. I can say that we have not had many projects in the hard to abate sectors. We've mostly been investing in projects around like e-mobility, which is a little bit easier for us to grasp onto. But we are sector agnostic. We are quite happy to support projects across sectors in the region. And we are also looking at opportunities to work with some of these harder to abate sectors. And Pradeep, you also asked about our performance. So we are, as I said, we piloted in 2019. We kind of formalized as a facility in 2022. So far, we've allocated about half of our financing, which is on track. And we are hoping as well in the next few years to continue fundraising more from our partners to kind of prove that, yes, we are supporting this transition. And the other thing I will mention as well is in addition to the trust funds, we've also been able to mobilize a significant amount of co-financing from partners. So like KfW, AFD, EIB, and with them, they quite often bring grant, which further blends the cost of the financing.
Thank you. I think so the key sort of points are that, it's ADB is hosting, administering the fund, brings with it a lot of due diligence and credibility, crowding in of partners such as the Green Climate Fund, bilateral donors who bring in grants, potentially even philanthropies. And it's good to know that hard to abate and decarbonization is not excluded from the remit of the fund, although we haven't done much in that space. So that's a message out to the people in the room. Just a caveat, I think ACGF currently is only working with sovereign clients, right?
Yes, so it is just with sovereign clients or SOEs.
Or SOEs, yeah. So that's sort of homework for us to take back as ADB to say, look, looking at the financing needs, so these kinds of blended finance platforms clearly are useful. It brings together strength in numbers and pipeline development gets easier because we kind of do our hand-holding. So maybe we need to think about sort of, how can we expand this to look at some of these hard to abate sectors as well. Just moving on to the sort of one interesting aspect of the entire transition story, of course, financing was talked about, but transmission lines and grid interconnection is something that I think is another important point. You probably heard it many times over the last few days. There is no transition without transmission. Whether you want to electrify or you want to produce green fuels, ultimately you got to start from electrons, green electrons. Li Yangfei, thank you very much for your presentation on the ACG. ADB is very keen on working on the ACG. You would have heard that during some of the panels. But I didn't see a slide there on how, or ideas you have on how ADB might be able to support the whole APG initiative. So any further thoughts on that?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Definitely, I believe ADB will play a very important role. Firstly, let me say, I think the cost of financing make a huge difference in the feasibility or viability of technologies. So that in this regard, any single project, if ADB can be part of it, needless to say, you provide some preferential rates. And more importantly is that, as been mentioned, this will leverage even more private funding to be available and at much lower rates, I would say, because your joining it would reduce the perceived risk, right? So from time to time, I think people perceive even higher risk with cross-border projects, right? So it's very important, a stabilizer in financing. Secondly, I think new technologies are to be, I think, eventually gradually adopted by APG projects, related projects. So again, this may raise perceived risk from another angle. So if we have like dedicated funds like ACGF, right, and joining maybe with Japan Transition Funds Finance, this would enhance the availability for financing APG projects. Another perspective is that I think a think tank like AREA can also play a bigger role along with ADB because, as you understand, the coordination or harmonization play a huge role in the formation of APG-based multilateral power trade. And as I tried to point out that more advanced MPT will provide higher return to any investment in APG-related projects. So that in this regard, I think feasibility study or any other kind of supportive study joining force with ADB, I mean by think tanks like AREA, right? We can help promote the bankability of, in general, APG projects a lot. Yeah, so these are, for now, what I can think about the roles that ADB can contribute. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I also saw that you had the slide of the West Kalimantan Sarawak interconnection. That was, it was one of the pioneering projects that was actually financed, I think, in 2010 and commissioned by 2012. That's ADB financed. And we learned a lot from that process. And you know, I was privileged to be part of the implementation of that project. And so, yes, we are really keen to see more of those. And we would love to get our hands on another power interconnection project in the region. But we've pursued so many of them. And as you said, for all the reasons on your first slide, it's not an easy process. You need political will, you need standards and harmonization, you need resource adequacy studies, you need all of the technical standards to work, and then you need a lot of institutional coordination to happen for all of that to happen. And again, it's not something that's going to happen in the next 5 years, but we'll need to kind of roll out over the next 5, 15, 20 years. Thank you very much. I do want to turn to the audience. We're running out of time, and it is the end of the day, but please, if there are 1 or 2 pressing questions, happy to take it. You've been a really good and patient audience. I want to make sure that people have a chance to ask. Yes, please. If you can step up to the mic and mention your name, affiliation, and a quick, straight question.
Akilur Rahman from Hitachi Energy, I'm CTO. So good to see the very diverse set of panelists, electron, molecule, and finally green steel.
New names, nicknames. Who's electron? Who's molecule?
Yeah.
In Southeast Asia, we have nicknames.
LNG molecule, and of course steel. You said, it is easy to finance green. That's why they have named it green steel. But I know that behind it is green. Yeah.
And there is no definition for green steel, by the way.
Yeah, it's not in color. Yeah.
Please.
Well, I think the question here is this is exactly the value chain what we are looking at: the electron, the molecule, and finally coming up with the goods. I mean, in the GDP terms. I mean, the entire value chain of the sustainability, the green energy. I think that's very important. So, question is how ADB. I mean, you said it's difficult to finance. Maybe you go for maybe siloed areas for financing. How do you take this as a value chain financing for the green?
Okay, so
It's
I guess,
yeah.
should we go to? Yeah, you said ADB. Okay, let me maybe take a stab at it, and then if you want to supplement. I think. Okay, so industrial decarbonization is new for us, as I sort of said that as a disclaimer when we started this, right? So we're just getting into this space. With governments, we are having higher level sort of policy dialogue on broad standards, on enabling policies, on incentive mechanisms, viability gap financing, and things like that. So where we could use a small amount of our resources to leverage a lot of the public resources. We're also working with climate funds to bring in low-cost climate money. For instance, we helped 6 countries in the region to put together applications or expressions of interest for decarbonization financing. So we're waiting on the results of that. Once that come in, we'll be able to work with private sector entities such as Steel Asia, for instance, or if it's a green ammonia producer or an exporter, we would be able to work with those kinds of entities. And they might work through the whole project. In that case, a project could be get renewable energy from the grid, electrolyzer stack, and the molecule out, or it could be they could also be building the renewable energy generation facility, for instance. Or it could be we could be providing a corporate loan to a large steel conglomerate at the corporate balance sheet level as a sustainability linked loan, where they slowly shut down their use of coal-fired captive power plant. So there's so many different variations of this that can work. But let me go back to ACGF and see if any thoughts based on their experience with other sectors as well.
Yeah, I won't add too much. I think Pradeep covered quite a bit of it. But the really interesting thing with ADB is that we have so many different modalities available to us to provide financing. Within the sovereign financing, I think there's maybe 6 or 7 different modalities that we have available to us, from the straight project loan to the program loans on the policy level with the governments. We also have one with financial intermediaries, so we can provide loans to banks that then on-lend into the industry. We also have our private sector team here, and what we're increasingly seeing is kind of us crossing the floor to each other with the sovereign and private sector trying to come together a lot more often, and have these coordinated approaches with some of these harder sectors to work together, where we recognize we really need sovereign and private sector kind of planning together and coordinating at the same time to really tackle these problems. It's not just a sovereign problem, it's not just a private sector problem. So I think we're seeing a transition to a lot more of that cooperation within our own organization, and also just trying to be a bit more creative with the modalities that we have available.
Yeah, I think that's the next level of sort of sustainability and addressing the ESG part. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions? I know we take questions on the app online, but I don't think we have time. So if there are questions, we'll just take them down, and then we can find a way to sort of post answers. Going once? Going twice? Okay. All right. Let's bring this panel to an end. Please join me in thanking our panelists for taking the time and for their insights. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you for being such a wonderful audience. And let's carry on with the good work of industrial decarbonization. No. Excuse me. Sorry for a moment. We'll just finish the photograph and then we have closing remarks by Keiko Takahashi-san. Apologies. Come, actually join us for the photograph.
Sorry. Thank you very much, distinguished speakers and all participants for active discussion. And so we cannot emphasize the importance of today's topic, accelerating energy transition and transition finance. So on behalf of ADB's Executive Director Office for Japan of ADB's Board of Directors, I very much appreciate the collaboration for ASEC that Japan's METI area and ADB are leading in making efforts to promote energy transition in Asia and the Pacific. So we very much appreciate the strong leadership and the cooperation of these institutions. And Kihara-san from METI, who is not here today, but visited a few days ago, and Yuta-san for excellent presentation, and Dr. Lee Yang-Fei from area, and from ADB, DG Hide, and the Director for Energy Transition, Pradeep. And thank you for your collaboration, and Emanuele and Catherine. And there are more ADB staff actually joining this collaboration from different sector teams, such as finance. So today I'm pleased to have seen the discussion inspired by other experts, Mr. Simon Roland from IEA, Mr. Pek Hoon Chon from Steel Asia Manufacturing Group. So these different groups background, so really inspires our discussions. So as Yuta-san METI emphasized, we need to aim to achieve 3 goals: emissions reduction and stable energy supply and economic growth. So I would like to emphasize that the green transformation, GX, is really integral part of sustainable development and growth. So development and the climate challenges are increasingly complex as energy transition requires a holistic approach. So as it requires implementation across supply chains, as some other colleagues emphasized, as Emanuele explained, for support at multi levels from macro, basically national level. Sorry, I'm trying to speed up. So. Market level, program level, and the project level. So all levels we need to work on. So I would also like to emphasize that the technology and the finance are key enablers for energy transition. So we so greatly appreciate these initiatives. So, and thank you very much. I hope this collaboration will enhance energy transition and the transition finance in the region. And then as this is very holistic, so we need to work together for achieving the long-term goal. Thank you very much. Sorry.